So what grounds would Djokovic actually have to challenge this decision?
Well, that's a really good question. There's two things the minister had to be satisfied existed in order to cancel the visa in this way. Firstly, he had to be satisfied that a ground existed under Section 116, and the ground he's looked at is health and good order. He has to be satisfied that ground existed. And secondly, he had to also be decided that it's in the public interest to cancel the visa. For my part, that second of those two issues is the really interesting one, but historically, it's an issue that the courts have really refused to actually be engaged in. Historically, the courts have said the public interest is whatever the minister says the public interest is. So that may be, I expect Mr Djokovic will argue both points. The first one, he argued last time, in one of the 11 grounds he argued in the first case, that he fell within the target guidelines, that he fell within the meaning of double vaccinated, that is, it was contraindicated, that he didn't need to be vaccinated within 6 months, and he also needs to engage with the public interest. Both of those are big, complex issues, more complicated than really what he had to argue on Monday of this week.
So that being the case, if the minister simply argues, or the minister's barrister simply argues that he believed it was in the public interest to do it, how does Djokovic stand up to that? If generally the attitude of the court has been that the public interest is what the minister has said it is, how do you actually argue against that?
That's really difficult. That's a really difficult case. I think his best way to argue, the best chance of success he has, is the first round, to actually argue that he does not pose a risk. And I do think it's a challenge for the government that if Mr Djokovic posed such a risk to the health and good order of Australian society, why did we leave him in society for the last 5 days? That does present a real challenge. I suspect that the minister had planned to act on Monday night so that Mr Djokovic was not actually released from detention, but perhaps took pause when he listened to the very strong comments of Judge Kelly at the end of that case. I think that caused the minister to just put a pause, to take it slowly and really be seen and to actually consider the case in detail.
Now, there have been reports that Djokovic could risk being expelled from Australia for 3 years if he's deported. What's the truth here?
Anyone who departs Australia or is removed from Australia after a cancellation like this faces a prima facie 3-year re-entry ban for most temporary visas. Firstly, that ban does not apply to permanent visas at all. And secondly, the government can overturn or waive that re-entry ban if either it's compelling and compassionate circumstances affecting Australia or it's in Australia's national interest. It would not be a difficult argument to pose that if Australian Open next year, that it's in Australia's interest, commercial interest, if nothing else, and reputational interest, to waive that re-entry ban and allow him to come and play. It's not as dramatic as perhaps some commentators have actually made out.
Well, that's good news. But what long-term effects do you think this saga is going to have on our border policies and I suppose more broadly the application of immigration law?
For someone like me, it poses nothing new, but what I think it does disclose, it sheds light on the great complexity of our visa immigration law, amongst the most complicated visa systems anywhere in the world. It also highlights the significant ministerial discretions and the fact that a decision could be made and the minister could personally step in and come to a different view with very limited grounds of review. I think that will be perhaps an eye-opener for the public, and that I think is significant. For me, we already knew that. It's been my life for 25 years. But the public, I don't think, realises the sheer layer of complexity and at times capricious nature of the application of our laws in this area.
Well, the one thing we do know is that this story ain't going away. David Prince, thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure.